right. Well, hello. My name is Jess McBride. I work for YIMBY Law on the Campaign for Fair Housing Elements. Very excited to talk to you about the Housing Element Audit Tool today, and how you can use it to assess housing elements that are coming out in your cities, which are, the 8-year housing plan for the next 8 years. So they really do make a difference for housing in our local jurisdictions. As I was saying before, there's a lot of different ways to assess a housing element, right? We all have different values, different goals, and that's totally cool. Chris Elmendorf, professor up at UC Davis, he helped us make this housing element audit tool with the lens of, with his lens of the law, right? What are the legal requirements of the housing element? As well as what are some future things that we can keep in mind for best practices. Maybe in the future, we can get better laws on the books so that we can have housing elements that actually result in more housing, which I think is the goal, right? That's, should be the goal of the housing element process, is not to just go through the exercise, but really to get housing on the ground. And a lot of the questions that the audit asks relate to that. So it relates to, are these policies, are these approaches really going to get housing on the ground? So you might have other priorities, things like, did they do good public outreach? Focusing on certain things like farm worker housing, emergency shelters. There's a whole bunch of things in the housing element. So this isn't this is not all encompassing. This is really about that legal lever of, did they do an adequate job to actually get housing on the ground? And are these things that can actually be pushed back against when they're trying to get their housing element certified? And so that's kind of the lens of this particular tool. So I'm going to share my screen. And we can look at the tool together. I encourage you, if you want to look at your own screen instead of mine, that's also fine. You can follow along. This is all on the internet. This is all publicly accessible. So it's definitely available for you. I'm going to ask Elizabeth or really anyone else who wants to take leadership. If there are questions in the chat, it's hard for me to also see the chat and the screen. So
I'll moderate.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
I'm happy to moderate.
You can just
Sure.
unmute and ask the question if it's something that needs to be answered in the moment. I'm also joined today by two of our YIMBY Law interns, Alex Klein and Ross Johnson. Hey guys. Alex has been interning for us. Has it been a month now, Alex, or maybe a couple weeks?
This is my 4th week. Yeah.
So Alex is I'm going to be passing the mic to Alex to see what his experience of this tool has been too, because while I was really involved in creating it, Alex has been really involved in using it. And I always think it's very good to ask people who are actually using the tools, what's your experience on the ground of using it? So Alex will be joining me as well. All right, so this is our website, fairhousingelements.org. This is the front page. The audit tool is easy to find under the volunteer menu. Housing element audit tool. That's not it. Sorry. Cool. All right. That was the volunteer page, which you should also go to. I'm not sure why that pinged. So anyway, this is our audit tool website. Everything you need is right here. So this is like just a tiny explainer. If you have any questions, I encourage you to email my colleague, John. You can also email me, but we just sort of identified one person. The audit tool is right here in this form. It goes down and it's a long scrolling form. How exciting. But we're not going to start with the form because those are the answers to the quiz, right? So we don't start with the answers, right? We start with the questions. So here's the form right here on the page, but we're going to go to the explainer, which is at this big red button. we call this explainer the heat sheet in a like sort of a cheeky way. It's the acronym Housing Element Audit Tool. Very cool. So it's just a way, it's like cheat sheet. It's like the workbook that goes along with the audit. So that's what I'm mainly going to be talking about today. We're not going to go question by question through the audit tool. It's too much. So we're going to talk about the structure of this explainer. Hopefully some of you have seen this already. It's kind of long because it has a lot of information in it, which is great. And so hopefully by going over the structure of it and what's involved in it, then it will be a little bit easier to approach. All right, so we have a little introduction. Thank you for working with us, et cetera, et cetera. The second page is pro tips, and I definitely recommend looking through these because it's a lot of helpful advice for using this. One of the biggest things to me is when you use it, I would definitely recommend downloading the explainer as a Word document from this Google document. So this helps you, you can either use it on Google or you can use it as a Word document. If that's easier for you, you can print it out. I've heard other people, people like to print it if you want to, read a page. I like to do that a lot. But just having it, on hand when you're filling out the form and also when you're reading the housing element is really helpful. So you can kind of like track what you're seeing in the actual document. You can do it with other people. That's fun. That's not, I think Alex kind of does it by himself, so we don't have a lot of experience with that, but I think that's something that's really great for if you're working in an advocacy group together. So you don't have to learn, everything and go through everything. You kind of divide up the work. These keys are going to be throughout the explainer. These keys refer to kind of the purpose of the question. So when you see this big alarm, those are issues that are like pretty clear in the law and that we should be able to block. When you see that, it's something that's like, if they are failing at that, that's something where advocates can kind of speak up and say, hey, this is a problem. And HCD may actually force them to change it because it's super clear in the law currently. This other one, this little alarm clock, these are a little bit squishier. They're a little bit gray. And so part of being an advocate is to raise our voices and say, hey, this is a pattern we're seeing in our region. These are problems. And we're hoping that with our strong voices together, we can, make sure that HCD, yes, enforces this law and follows through with that because the language is there in the law, but it's a little bit gray. So keep an eye out on those. Those are something that are important. They just may be need a little bit of a nudge from us advocates. I'm gonna add some people to the room. Oh, thank you for doing that. Thank you. All right, and then the third one is this flag. These are issues that we want to flag for future legislation. They're probably not in the law itself. They're maybe more aspirational. So if you see a flag, it's possible that it won't be in the housing element because a lot of cities do the bare minimum, right? They don't go above and beyond. So when you see a flag, that's an indicator that that thing may not be in the housing element itself because the city may not be super aspirational. But there's something that we want to flag for later so that maybe our representatives, our legislators can put that in the law so that we can get better housing in the future. These are just sort of things with little tips. Give us suggestions. Again, this is an ongoing process. So, we really appreciate feedback. Rona, I see you in the room. Rona gave some really good feedback for us when she used it. So we're very open to that. This is a link back to the website for when you're ready to go. This is the table of contents. We all know what that is. One tip about Google Docs is you can create this little scrolling table of contents here, and they're linked, so you can kind of switch between the topics. There are 6 topics that we cover. Again, not comprehensive, but these are some of the most powerful topics that have a lot of leverage, legally speaking. So the 6 are, I'll just read from this side here: site capacity, accessory dwelling units, affirmatively furthering fair housing, rezoning, constraints, and policy and programs. Those are the 6. So this explainer includes 6 sections to go over those 6 topics. You're going to see this about section. It's going to tell you more about the policy, more about, which includes like the actual law as well as the like aspirational part of it too. And so, it's because we want you to be equipped and educated to approach this topic. Some of the sections might have definitions. This one is particularly long, this number 1. And so don't get discouraged by seeing this first one. We try to divide it up so that it makes sense in the flow, and you can find topics later, like subtopics when you're looking back. Wow, this one's super long.
Jess, if I could just interject here.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Just to add, the site capacity section, it tends to be a little bit more spread out across the housing element. So you're going to have to look in a lot of different places to find the information. But like the ADUs, that should all really be in like 1 or 2 places. The affirmatively furthering fair housing, that should really be in 1 place. So the auditing gets a lot easier once you get through site capacity.
It's true. Site capacity sort of deals with the big task that cities have of identifying sites in their city that are suitable for housing. And that's a big task, especially when your city is a lot bigger. And not only identifying the sites, but seeing like, are these actually going to result in the RHNA numbers that we have, right? The regional housing needs allocation. So if that's why that section is so big, it's really the meat of the housing element. If you're someone that doesn't like to start with the meat and you want to work your way up, I suggest maybe starting with accessory dwelling units, affirmatively furthering for housing, just to get warmed up, right? And you know yourself, do you want to start with the challenging thing or do you want to start with a warm up? And either way is fine. So just a little note on that. And thank you, Alex, for that clarification. So each section, you're going to have like the content, the educational piece, the explainer. We're also going to end with best practices, right? This is what the model housing element would have. This is the aspiration. It's probably stuff that like housing elements won't have, but that's okay. It's just to give you an idea of like, here's the top of the spectrum. And if you see it in your housing element, awesome, note that. And so that we can actually praise them, right? Like we actually want to find good examples so that we can point to them. Each section will end with references. So there's not going to be a ton of links within in the explainer section. Hopefully all the references will be at the end. If you happen to find other references that would help and that like further educate on that topic, let us know. We'd love to include them. So after that explainer section, each section will have the audit section. So you can see that here is that there's like about and then the audit section. This is essentially the questions that you're going to find on the form that we saw on the website earlier. So you can use this again, like if you copy it as your own Google document, or if you copy it, onto a Word document or print it, you can use this to like circle the things as you go. And especially for the site capacity, like Alex said, it's going to be patterned throughout the housing element. Having this on hand so that when you're scanning through the housing element first, and you can kind of make notes, you can kind of answer it as you go. So you're not doing it all at once, like a test or a quiz in the form. I'm going to pause and see if Alex has any comments on this, like using the questions in the audit section.
Yeah, so the questions are, I know this is going to sound really obvious. Read the whole question first. the questions, they may seem not super intuitive and very specific, and they're looking for very specific things, but they are really, really important. And so that's the biggest thing I would just suggest, but especially with the site capacity. And I think just generally, before answering the questions, just back up when you look at the housing element, read the table of contents, orient yourself to where things are and sort of what's going on. And then sometimes you'll come across a question earlier. So maybe just looking at what's up here, the 5th cycle development rate, they may have like a section at the end where they say we're through our past achievements. And you may not come across that until the end. So you may want to just like note that for yourself and say, well, in the table of contents, they're getting to this at the end. So I'll do that at the end. You need to answer exactly in order.
Yeah. The state does not mandate the exact form of the housing elements, and there's a bunch of different consultants. Some are even done in-house. So especially if you look at multiple ones, they're going to be laid out in different ways. They're going to be structured in different ways. There's going to be maybe even like a smaller element, but then a bunch of appendices, like additional PDFs that they add on. So it's we wish we could just say like, here's what it will be, here's what to look for in this order, but unfortunately they're all different. And so it just is like another like challenge for people who are actually reading housing elements. It's also not like a fun thriller novel. Like it is definitely dry stuff. So I think Alex's suggestion of like scanning through the table of contents, maybe doing a quick like scan through the whole housing element before, like kind of as you're starting to see like where things are, what tables are where, where you're going to find certain data is going to be good, and it will set you up for success as you kind of dig in and like actually analyze it. So as you can see, this is where the little symbols are. They're right next to the questions. Each question has a number and a letter that corresponds to the form as well. So you're never going to be super lost when you go back to fill out the form. You're going to see the section number and then like the number letter combo that will indicate which actual question it is. And that helps us too when we have this in the database. Each column has that like number letter combo too. So you can, connect it right to the same question. It's not going to get lost. I'm going to pause really quickly and see if anyone has any questions so far. You can raise your hand. I'm going to see if I can do a little gallery view. Or you can just unmute if no one else is talking and ask a question. If there are no questions, that might be good.
I want to put a question into the chat. Are the question answer buttons that we press on, or do we fill in the blanks listed?
For some of them, you're filling in the blanks, and then for others, you're inputting text. And there's a notes section on each of these sections, and it would be really, really helpful for everybody to, when you find something, just cite where you found it in the notes. So it makes it a lot easier for us to go back and help with drafting public comment letters.
Great. This is a great question. If more than one person is working on this, like, so say you're doing, City of Placentia, and you've got one person working on the ADU section and another person working on the site section, can they do it on the same form? That's a great question. I'm going to pause really quickly and just show you like, here's the site. Again, this is the biggest section. Here's the site capacity section. Most of the stuff is multiple choice. Some of them you can pick as many as you want. Some are just yes, no, not clear. There's certain ones with blanks where you would write in, and then every section has questions at the end with problems
problems with this topic, virtues in this topic, and notes. So you can always, like, if you feel like you're not, like you don't know how to describe it in the options available, you can always add it into the notes or the problem section. To the question of if two people are working on it. So I'm going to interpret that in two different ways, and then you can kind of clarify if you have other questions. So one is like, what if I was auditing Costa Mesa and Alex was auditing Costa Mesa too? We didn't even know each other. We just did it differently, right? That's totally okay. And it's interesting to have two different answers. And our database is totally fine with that, because it kind of, the unique ID for each entry is like the place and the name of the auditor, and I think the date. So if I did like two of the same audits in the same day, that probably wouldn't, well, actually, no, I think that would be fine. But anyway, so it's totally fine to do it. And I think, you know, if we're looking back at Costa Mesa, we'd have these two audits and we could then compare them and see if there was anything different, and then we could investigate those two differences. Another option is if I was working with Alex and I wanted to do the site capacity section, and then I asked Alex to do the rest of it, right? So I could just go to the site capacity section. I would put in, you know, jurisdiction, and these are the little red things are the required sections. So you can see that like this section one and all these questions are not required to submit, right? So I would say, yes, I'm doing this site capacity section, and then I would do all the questions that I wanted to do, and then I would press submit. And then my information would be in there for the site capacity. And then Alex would do his later. He would say yes to all the other sections and no to, you know, the site capacity question. And then we would just have like two halves of a whole, and that's okay too. And then
so basically, like if you and a partner are working on it and you want to do your section and they want to do their section, it's okay to submit it as a quote, like an incomplete record, but you just worked on the section that you did and we'll put it together on the back end.
Yeah, I think that if I was working with Alex, I think what I would try to do is I would share a Google document of the heat sheet together. Like I said, like, you know, download a copy that's just for Costa Mesa, and then we would work on it together, and then maybe like figure out a time or figure out one person to do one submittal. I think that would be better and easier. Plus it would give us a chance to connect and compare notes. But if that's not possible, it's okay. You can submit differently or separately. Yeah, and then I saw Patricia's hand up. I didn't want to forget that question.
Hi, is there a timing on this? Like when, I know it would be when the draft's issued, but how much time do we have to go through it?
That's a great question. So I know a lot of you, and not all of you, but a lot of you are in Southern California like me. I'm in Los Angeles. So for all of our Southern California jurisdictions, all of the cities and the unincorporated counties in Southern California, our housing elements are due October 15th of this year. Cities will probably take advantage of the 120-day grace period after that date, but they are, you know, ideally should be shooting for October. Some drafts have already come out. And the exciting thing is that you don't have to do this like right before, you know, I don't know, like there's many phases. I mean, for better or worse, right? Like it's a long process. A lot of times they'll come out with a first draft, but then they might change it because they've gotten public comment on that. I mean, that would be ideal, right? Like they're like listening to the public. They might also change it because they've maybe submitted a preliminary draft to the state and the state has given them comments. Maybe they've passed it through the city council or the planning commission. Those bodies have given them comment. So there's going to be multiple drafts, ideally, right? Like that, like that's what the drafting is trying to like make the best product possible. And hopefully cities are doing that. So I would say the answer is try to audit the first draft you can find, especially before it goes before, the planning commission. Planning commission is usually the first stop, and then it's the city council to get approval. Again, there might be kind of cycles where it goes before planning commission, it goes back to the drawing board, and by in kind of getting input from the actual decision makers. But I think as soon as possible is great, because then you can work with, folks like me and Alex to, or Mildred and Cesar or Elizabeth or anyone you want to work with, to say like, okay, now that we've analyzed the housing element, let's write a letter to say, listen, these are some problems we found, or these are some things you could do better, right? And you want to get that in before it actually goes to the decision makers. I saw Rona's hand too. And now there's 18 comments in the chat that I can't see. Rona, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so if we're doing this at multiple times, I didn't notice, is there a date are we filling out the date every time we fill this out? So you'll know.
You don't need to, because we have an automatic date submitted in our database. So that's okay. Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question is, should we be sending copies of our public comment letters to you or Elizabeth? Are you wanting copies of those things?
I mean, we would love it. We love hearing what's going on in your local jurisdictions. We also love when you work with your local organizers, so if I'll put it in the chat, if you want to copy us on any of your letters, copy info@fairhousing. Typing as performance is, something I'm still working on. info@fairhousingelements.org. That can kind of, it's also this kind of clue in to be like, hey, we're also working with this larger group of activists. A lot of times cities try to do things because they think, we just need to get this done. No one really care about it. So being able to sort of reference a larger group of housing advocates is sometimes nice, to be like, hey, we've got some muscle behind us.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions in the chat that I should answer out loud? All right.
So Sean says, would it be more effective to use the copy of the doc to fill it out, and then once it's done, just fill in everything and on the actual tool and submit it? That's what I would do. If you can coordinate with your partner or partners, then that's the optimal. But we'd rather have, half of a sandwich than no sandwich. So if you're just up for the ADU and the AFFH sections, send that to us. And if you're not ready to bite off the site's inventory, we'll look around and see if we can find another partner, even if it isn't necessarily somebody that is, working directly with you.
It's a really good point. This is a lot, and not everyone has the time commitment too. And so I think that, getting with Kennedy Commission, Elizabeth, us to say hey, I, kind of just want to zero in on the ADUs, or I want to zero in on affirmatively furthering fair housing, or I just want to look at their policies, right? It's totally cool to specialize in something. And like Elizabeth said, having even a section done that you feel really confident about is great. And so I think that, and you can write a letter based on that section, right? Especially the affirmatively furthering fair housing piece that's new, and that I think cities are struggling with, to define. I think if you focused on even one piece, wrote a letter about that piece to your local jurisdiction, that is awesome, and that's more than most people in your city will do. So very much agree with that, Elizabeth. Alex, what has been your experience trying to metabolize this information and then starting to do the audits and using the form? Any notes from the front of things that we should kind of keep an eye out for or be encouraged by and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I struggled with, and that the form, it makes you sort of believe that you should be finding everything on the audit in the housing element. And a lot of the times, cities just won't do certain things. And that's exactly sort of the point of this, is why we're doing these audits and why we're calling them out. So if you don't see something, a lot of these documents, they're 150, 200 page documents. If you don't see something and you don't want to spend all of your time reading through every single page of it, which you shouldn't. It will be too confusing and will take too long. There is a real possibility that it's just not there, and that is something that we want to note and that we want to call the municipality out on.
Would you say you could also reach out to your planner, right? So if you're in, we'll just use Mission Viejo because that's what's in the chat. With the when they post the housing element, they should also post the name of the planner, who's the contact person. So if you are bold and these folks, you know, they are our public servants, treat them nicely, but they do work for us. Send them an email and say, I'm looking for this information that I understand is supposed to be in the plan. Could you help me find it?
Yeah, that is above and beyond excellent. Like, keep the pressure up. I totally agree. And I think definitely with the affirmatively furthering fair housing, that's the section where we, as the public commenting on this housing element, could really have a lot of important input. A lot of cities have left this section kind of blank, or they haven't figured out what policies and programs they want to enact to combat those issues. So really, like, that is an excellent place to drill down and push, and that is like a really important section. So even though it's pretty squishy, it's really important.
Totally agree. There's definitely both quantitative and qualitative content in the housing element, right? So there's sometimes there's very set ways of like, here's how to, you know, identify sites, and you either are doing it right or you're doing it wrong. And then there's other stuff that's more qualitative, like, you know, are you actually having good ideas, or having ambitious ideas, or having ideas that will actually change things, or are you suggesting things that are sort of already in place and won't change anything? So, and I think we're all here because we do want things to change, not to like cement in the same way we've been going. So yeah, I think that, you know, and figure out who you are, you know, as an analyst. Are you someone that enjoys that qualitative, like, policy stuff with, you know, like that deal with ideas and policy and programs, or are you more of a quantitative person and you want to focus on the site inventory and numbers and things? And so we need everyone and everyone's skills. So don't feel bad if you feel like you're not you know, like strong on one thing. You're probably strong on the other. Gigi.
Hi, thank you. This is really informative. I'm not quite sure what your process is today, but since someone mentioned that Mission Viejo has they're working on their third draft, is it possible for you to take us there so that we could actually see one in place and what suggestions you could make? I'm just a visual learner. I don't know if you could share.
I am too. Could someone help me by finding the link to the, we could take a look together. We probably can't audit it together because it will take too long. No, but like, just looking at the draft will be interesting. I sort of agree with that.
That would be helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, Jess, I think the last draft that I saw was not very complete.
Okay.
On the site analysis, but I can share the link in a minute.
Okay. That's another good point, Cesar, is that sometimes a city will release documents and it's not a complete housing element. They might, release part of their site inventory. They might release, some of their policies, because maybe they want feedback on that from the state. Maybe they want feedback on that, from the public, but it's not their complete document yet. So again, it's kind of like, there's a variety of things that could happen. There's some things that are predictable and a lot that is not. So again, you have, hopefully you have my email. I'll share it right now again. But you're always welcome to get in touch with us at YIMBY Law and, ask a question or, ask your local organizers, is this a complete housing element, or is this, does this seem to be, sort of an incomplete thing? One thing I actually shared this link in the chat, but I wanted to kind of show you, because I think it kind of goes part and parcel with the audit. Oops, that didn't copy. That's just my friend. So this is a page we just made for the drafts of the housing elements. I know, there's 500 cities in California. Oh man, it's plural. Sorry, guys. So, this is just a crowdsourcing way to help give people access to the drafts. So we'll let this load for a second, and you can see that we have a link to the audit tool.
Excuse me, Jess, you may want to do the Mission Viejo, but San Clemente's housing draft, they've already submitted it to HCD.
Okay.
So I put the link in there.
Yeah, it's the bottom in the chat. I don't want to.
So you can see that, we actually have the link for Mission Viejo here. Awesome. I don't think we have San Clemente yet. So that's something we could add right now.
There you go.
Okay. So it looks like so Mildred posted the San Clemente one. Let me dealing with two different browsers. Very exciting. Any other questions as I open this up? Cool. All right. Yeah, these can be kind of big documents sometimes, so just a heads up.
I was also going to point out that obviously there's a challenge sometimes where a lot of these drafts are being drafted internally and there's not a copy on the web page, or so that's something else to keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the Mission Viejo draft. Here's the table of contents. Again, with huge documents, table of contents becomes very good and very helpful. So it looks like they have their public comment process up front. Always a good thing to look at. I'd actually love to add this as the 7th section in our housing element audit tool. We just haven't gotten to it yet. But I think that especially for local activists, it's a good get check of like, wait a second, why did you reach out to this group or this organization or this affordable housing, developer or this, homeless shelter. So it's like the state won't know what they're missing, and we as local advocates will know a little bit better. This is a required section, this housing needs assessment. It's about sort of specific housing needs, and it doesn't really feature in our audit tool because it's pretty much pulling census data and stuff like that. But it's also interesting. It's an interesting resource to learn about your city or a city that you don't know about. So a lot of good data right there in that section. Let's see, constraints. constraints is a whole section in the audit tool. So this is great how they have it in one little section. I feel like this resources looks strange. I don't know exactly what that will be talking about. Looks like fair.
If I wanted to focus on ADUs and affirmatively furthering fair housing, and I was looking at that document, where would I begin so I wouldn't get overwhelmed?
Yeah, so the affirmatively furthering fair housing would be in this policy section. See, they have a fair housing section here. Because they have like that section that will probably be about like, you know, our goal is to like, you know, have a hotline for complaints and things like that. We also want to see affirmatively furthering fair housing in the actual site inventory, right? Because affirmatively furthering fair housing is not just about like, we want to get complaints of people saying they're discriminated against. We also want to meaningfully break up segregation patterns in our city by putting housing where there's opportunity, right? A lot of times the neighborhoods that have opportunity are the places that are the most exclusive, and there's not a variety of housing types there. It's usually, you know, larger houses and no apartment buildings. So we want to see a really concerted effort to have a variety of housing types in all neighborhoods, not just in the typically multifamily neighborhoods. For ADUs, that's generally going to be in the site inventory. It looks like residential land inventory is in the Appendix B here. Alex, has that been your experience, is that the ADU discussion is like in the inventory part, or are there other, maybe in a policy? It could possibly be a policy as well.
But one thing I will add that speeds up this whole process is if you Control F and search for key terms like ADU, and you find all of you, I mean, this requires a lot of skimming, but you will be able to find where they're talking about any given search term and then read the context around it. And generally, 9 times out of 10, you'll find the information. And that'll just help you sort of navigate through the document a lot more quickly.
As you can see, I pretty quickly found a accessory dwelling unit section by doing Alex's method of like Command F, and then found this. So here it looks like they're kind of discussing, you know, a little bit of policy, but they don't necessarily have a table of how many, you know, accessory dwelling units they think will be built. So that will probably be in the inventory section.
The other thing you can do is get out the map of where the sites are and the sites that they're identifying for as being appropriately zoned for high enough density, 30 dwelling units to the acre to be affordable housing. Those should all not be, you know, I'll use Fullerton as an example, right? They should not all be south of the railroad tracks. We need to see a distributed opportunity sites for affordable housing. So that's kind of like that's been my back of the envelope that I've been using, is just, you know, looking at, you know, where have people been traditionally shut out? That's where we want to see opportunity for affordable housing.
Yeah, and it looks like now that we're in Appendix B, the land inventory, it looks like they're not quite done, right? They have this whole like thing is blank. So I think they're still waiting on some data. They do have this little, again, they have the accessory dwelling unit in the Appendix B, and they talk about how many will be built there, because the inventory is really that quantitative section of like how many units do we think each site will get, and that's often where the ADU calculation is too. You know, it looks like, again, underutilized sites, they're still waiting on their figure. So, and that's, yeah. So this is totally fine, right? This is a draft. This is a good thing to note in the audit, is that hey, I'm looking at this and, you know, we're still waiting on information. That helps people like Cesar and Mildred and Daisy. Daisy, I saw you come in. Elizabeth, you know, people in Orange County to say like, okay, Mission Viejo's done some, but like we're still waiting on it. And it just helps, it helps the group kind of monitor what's going on. So it's not a failure to like find a lack of something. It just means that like you're correctly like monitoring the process.
Yeah. And
Can
Jess,
I?
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, can I share my screen for a quick second? I just want to show them. I found a housing inventory in the San Clemente plan. So I can show them what it looks like. Is that okay?
Yeah, I can stop
Okay.
sharing mine.
All right,
Yeah, while you're doing that, I think it's also important to ensure that there's a public process where these documents and sites are available, because even though the city has a draft that's incomplete, they have been showing at their council meeting and planning commission meeting site inventories and areas that they are considering without having public participation or analysis to that. So that's a critical part to that.
So this is an example of, this is the San Clemente housing element, and you can see, I mean, right now we're obviously just looking at the spreadsheet part, but there's a map ID. The APN is the assessor's parcel number. This is the address of the property. How many acres is it? What is the general plan designation? That's what GP means. So for this MU2 is probably multi-use 2. And just something to be aware of, cities can write their own zoning code. So while in general, they are similar, the city of San Clemente could call it mixed use 2, and in Fullerton we might call it multi-use. So just be aware that it's not always standard in terms of the terminology, but there should be a key. The zone, so in this case, their general plan and their zoning, they use the same designation. Not all cities do that. So if these are different, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem. Allowable density, this is something to look at. If they're claiming that this is a site for affordable housing, this number needs to be 30. And this is 30 dwelling units to the acre.
At least 30, not 30.
Right, sorry. Hopefully it's more. Ideally, we want it to be more.
Great.
But the minimum has to be 30 dwelling units to the acre. Potential units, this is where my expertise starts to really fall away. So Jess,
so potential units, what I'm seeing here is that they're probably, they're using this 80% as a like a sort of anticipated capacity. It's not like, you know, they're kind of assuming that the site will get redeveloped, and they're basing off of historic development patterns that usually
they're not developed to the highest level of zoning. It only 80%. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay.
Right. So it's like knowing, like, kind of assuming the site will get developed, we think that it will get developed at 80% of the capacity.
Of the zoned capacity, right? Which is different from what is the probability of the site being redeveloped at all.
Right.
Those are different
ideas. Really important, because it's not like, you know, a lot of these and most of these are owned by private parties, not by the city. And so, you know, not everyone wants to sell their land. And I actually want to pivot because I, you know, these are all different, and I don't want to get too in the weeds with these things. But I wanted to share with you guys, it's a good question, Patricia. I just saw your question. 36 is per acre, and not every parcel is a whole acre. So it'll probably be less than an acre. So it's a little bit of a math problem, but we can definitely help you with stuff like that too. I wanted to share one last tool. There's so many tools, but I wanted to share one last tool with you guys before I go, because it has to do with the site inventory as well. I actually just made this live today. I'm very excited about it. So again, I'm going to perform my typing skills. It's fairhousingelements.org/sites. plural again. So this is a really fun part of auditing. It's not really in the form necessarily. There's a little bit of a question, but this is kind of a different kind of thing. Remember the table that Elizabeth just shared, where it's each property is sort of all these details are there about the property. Part of the things that we can do as a local advocate is to do what we call ground truthing and see, you know, let's look at that property. Is that property, do we think this is really a legitimate site for housing, right? We've seen properties in those tables, like in the tables that say these are where affordable housing will be, you know, in the next 8 years. We've seen sites that are like a sliver that's like 15 feet wide, right? Like a tiny little property. We've seen sites that are like in marshland, underwater. You know, we've seen ones that have like utility poles going right through. We've seen ones that have like a new grocery store that just got, you know, built and or renovated, you know, like on site. Things that's like, this is not going to get redeveloped in the next 8 years. This is not really a legitimate. This is not really a legitimate site for housing, right? This isn't just a list of sites that you can find in our town. It should be sites that can accommodate new housing, especially affordable housing. So we made this form on our website. It's the ground truthing one. It's also under the volunteer tab on our main page. You can also suggest a site here, but basically, if you want to ground truth the site, you click the ground truthing button, you put in the property address, the current use, and the issues that you see with the site. Like if you know, like for me, South Pasadena identified the like historic Trader Joe's site as like there for redevelopment. And so like me and the like South Pasadena advocate were like, no, like that is definitely not getting redeveloped. That is a very like famous site. Like they're doing fine. They're not going to sell their property. So that's like not a good site for especially for affordable housing, right? Like we want to find legit sites. So this is a really easy way where you can, you know, you can kind of go through those addresses and based on your local knowledge, just fill out this quick form, submit it. And that information actually goes to HCD, to the Housing and Community Development Department of California. And they get to see like, oh yeah, this site, you know, a volunteer says like, this site's not good. And so they can then come back to the city and say, hey, South Pasadena, not a good site, got to find a different site. So yeah, that's a tool we're really excited about. Any other questions? I'm seeing like another 11 chat things. Anyone want to unmute?
Let's see, how will we know who is working in our city? Because I'm not sure who I would be working with in Irvine.
That's a great question. So I would ask your local organizers. I would ask Cesar and Kimberly Adams and Elizabeth. They are the folks that are focusing on Orange County. If you want to ask us at YIMBY Law, like, and see if anyone is on our list that is in, you know, that's like raised their hand for Irvine, I can definitely hook you up with those people. But I would say first stop is to your local organizers and see if anyone else has been working in Irvine or, you know, whatever town. Is
Anybody
anyone
else
here?
I thought Housing Element. I thought Housing Element could only submit sites that were public. Oh.
They can identify, and most of them are like, I mean, that's how it's not Sim City. Most land is owned by private people, maybe like you would be, but like, you know, by people who are not the city. And so
I guess my question is this.
Yeah.
If the city puts together a housing element with a litany of sites so that they're saying that this is where affordable housing can exist, and these sites are privately owned, and the owners, as in your example with Trader Joe's, don't even know that their sites have been listed. How is that acceptable?
Well, they're supposed to do a level. There's a level now of scrutiny and due diligence that is required beyond what was in the past. So ideally, they're supposed to get a letter from the owner saying that, you know, the owner is open to this change. The other thing they can do is they can show by the lease that they think that in the 8 years planning period, the use that is currently going on there is going to end. I'm not really quite sure how you would get a hold of a private lease, but there's a whole bunch of
Okay.
guidance that cities have been given.
And
I've
this is
talked to
actually-
Susan Kim about it.
This is
Okay.
actually all in the explainer.
Okay,
In
yeah,
this,
I'll
like,
take a look.
capacity, there's a section about, it's called like discontinuation of uses. And it's specifically about land that is occupied by some use, you know, even a parking lot, right? Parking lots are often revenue generating resources for people. And so, especially if you have half or more of your low income sites on those occupied sites, we call them non-vacant. You know, if you have half of your lower income sites as occupied sites, you have to show evidence. You have to at least put out a survey, right? There's methods in the site capacity explainer that shows, you know, exemplifies, but that is like a hard and fast law that like you have to show evidence that you think some % of these sites will be discontinued. Because you're right, it's not acceptable to just like willy-nilly like, oh yeah, like there's zoning capacity, but we actually don't think these sites will be sold and redeveloped. Rona.
I have a question.
Oh, Rona, let's go. Rona had her hand up, and then we'll go to you, Kimberly.
So just on that point, that was an example of one way that I found the YIMBY audit tool extremely helpful as I looked at San Clemente, because as a very specific example, more than 70% of the, I think it's like 70 or 80% of the lower income sites were on existing uses, whereas moderate income sites were like 70, 80% vacant sites. And so to me, that also pointed out an affirmatively furthering fair housing issue as well. So, you know, I found this tool super helpful in that regard.
That's a great point. And again, if you find stuff like that, I would send a quick email to, I'll put the state email in there too. You know, even if you're wrong, like even if you make a mistake, it's okay. Like the state can ignore you. But like if you have a good point, it's really good for the state to know. So, you know, because again, they have a really small staff at the state level, and they have like analysts like looking at this, and they probably have never been to the city that they're looking at. So having folks on the ground like us is really helpful. Kimberly?
Yeah, I think my question was answered. I was going to say, where do these reports go and do they go to HCD? I think it was just answered.
Oh, well, we don't plan to send the audits to HCD quite yet. I think we don't want to just sort of willy-nilly do that. We take the reports, and I think, you know, folks like Alex, we're kind of having a growing group of interns. We take the information that you submit through this, and then we actually help make like a letter to those cities, and we copy HCD to say, hey, like, this is what we found. So we do package it up a little bit better. I will say that like we're gonna try to do we're gonna do an automation that will send the report back to you. I know that Rona, that was like a comment. You're like, I want to see it after I submit it. I also am working on a way to make them into a PDF so that you can actually read it pretty easily. You can. Do we have a link right now? We don't have a link. We don't have a public link right now. But right now they go to a database. It's all horizontal. Like if you've seen like an Excel sheet, it's all horizontal, and that's like harder to read. So we are going to work on a way to get that into a PDF that's a little bit easier to read, and that you can kind of see on the website. Like, you know, you can click on it and read the PDF. So it'll be easier to share that way too. You can email HCD with any comments you have ever at this address that I'm putting in, housingelements@hcd.ca.gov. I think especially the ground truthing stuff, they really appreciate. They've said it multiple times, like this is a really powerful way for you to help as a local advocate, because it's just knowledge that they can't have in the same way that you do. So I definitely recommend getting some ground truth in on. Any other questions? This is an hour. This is great. This is way more. Way more. I love Gigi's recommendation for looking at an actual housing element. Thank you for that, Gigi.
Thank you for doing it.
Hi, this is great. Cool. I want to make sure that I, have not been following the chat because I'm bad at multitasking.
I've been following it. A lot of the
Good.
folks have been sharing information. Yeah.
And just, I would say, if you're an organizer here and you're working on it, like, feel free to drop your email in the chat. Because I do, like the Kennedy Commission and Elizabeth and Kimberly at United Way OC have been active for many months and some of them years. And so if this is up your alley and this is something you want to do, and you may already be connected to them, which is awesome. But yeah, they are the Orange County folks, and so we seek to be a resource to them, as well as you guys, and they're really the forefront of the organizing there.
So just to wrap it up, the one person said, where can we find the recording if we want to refer back to it? So that's on me to download the video, upload it to YouTube. I will send the video out to the registration list. So if you were in the room or you registered, you should be getting it. I will do that as soon as I can. And then the question about, should the info about the feasibility of the sites be in the housing element? If Cesar is still on the call, I would love him to respond to that. And I think that
I can also respond to that.
Oh, can you? Okay.
I don't think that they some of them do. So City of Sacramento, City of San Diego, they created like a tier system of like, based on this type, this like the quality, the characteristics of the site, we think it's like in tier 2 of, sort of feasibility or likelihood to redevelop or whatever. So there are some cities who do it. And then there's other cities who are just like, I'm gonna make a list and not provide a lot of information, and you figure it out. Yeah. So I would say, actually, Alex, do you have a sense of like how I would guess the majority do not have feasibility information. Has that been your experience?
It's interesting that the new state law said that they had to evaluate whether the likelihood of development, but it didn't give a metric for like a standard way of reporting that out.
Well, wait, is that you, Alex?
I was just going to mention, there's some cities that are putting that in the matrix and in terms of what the current use is and what outreach has happened, but we are pushing for more analysis on that.
Yeah.
There should be more analysis about the likelihood, the trends, what's happening in those neighborhoods. For example, we just saw some sites in the city this morning where they're in industrial areas, and those are going to be the affordable, even though there's no market rate development happening there. So it's kind of weird, but there has to be more to that.
Yeah, I think that our community is trying to really push for better analysis of feasibility, the likelihood of development and likelihood of discontinuation. I think that HCD has been a little bit light, has been a little bit of a good cop on that front, unfortunately. So we would, part of this is that we really think the likelihood of development is very important. And so, us kind of repeating it again and again of like, this is missing, this is needed, this is really important. And we, at least, I mean, it is a hard and fast requirement is that, if you do have the 50% or more of lower income in your non-vacant sites, you do need some sort of evidence, whether that's a survey or letters from the owner of discontinuation. So that is like that's the alarm, thing. It's like, that's required.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up because I have a 3:15 meeting with Jess. So it's a good reason for me to move my Zoom on. But I really am grateful to all of you for your time. And Jess and I have had a couple of conversations about possibly doing these on an ongoing basis. And perhaps in the next incarnation, we'll maybe take a look at a housing element, or maybe we can even get our intern Alex to do a walkthrough or a handheld viewing or something like that. So
I love that. Yeah, and Ross is on the call too. He just started, so he's going to be an expert very soon. And
awesome.
So yeah, we're all learning together. You know, like no one is done learning on a housing elements. Even
This
Chris
is
Elmendorf.
true.
So we're all doing it together. Thank
This
you
is
guys
true.
so much
Thank
for
you
coming
all.
out and listening to this wonky talk. I love it so much. Feel free to send questions anytime, and hopefully we'll cross paths soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.